Welcome back. Take a moment and look outside with me. Scenes like this remind us how much beauty we forget to notice. Today's story was shared with us by Arthur, who is now 92 years old. He didn't send this looking for sympathy or advice. He sent it because the reality of growing old surprised him in ways he never expected, and he felt that saying it out loud might help someone understand what time quietly does to a life. Here is his story. I'm 92 years old, and this isn't what I thought old age would be. When I was younger, I imagined this part of life as a long, gentle settling. I thought the hard work would be finished, the big worries resolved, and that I would finally feel some sense of arrival. I believed old age would feel earned, like sitting down after a lifetime of standing. What I didn't expect was how unfamiliar it would feel, even to myself. Most mornings now begin before I want them to. Sleep doesn't stay the way it used to. I wake up early, not rested, just awake. I sit on the edge of the bed for a moment, steadying myself, letting my body catch up to my mind. There's a brief inventory I do without thinking much about it. Knees, stiff. Back, sore but manageable. Hands a little slower today. This is how the day starts. Now, not with plans, but with assessment. No one ever tells you that aging isn't one big change. It's 1,000 small ones that arrive quietly. You don't wake up old one morning. You just notice one day that it takes longer to do the same things, that you forget names you once knew easily, that your reflection looks more like a stranger than a friend. You adjust each time without much fuss, until one day you realize how much adjusting you've already done. When people talk about old age, they usually talk about loneliness. They assume that's the hardest part. I believed that too. I thought being alone would be the thing that broke me. But loneliness isn't always the sharpest pain. What surprised me more was the feeling of no longer being necessary. When you're younger, even when you're exhausted, the world needs something from you. Work depends on you. Family relies on you. People expect you to show up. You complain about being busy, but that busyness gives your life a sense of weight. At 92, very little pulls at me anymore. Days come and go without asking much, and that can feel peaceful at times, but it can also feel unsettling if you weren't prepared for it. I had what most would call a decent life. I worked for decades. I stayed married. I raised children. I paid my bills. I didn't chase excitement or recognition. I believed in being steady. I thought consistency was a kind of virtue that would protect me in the end. I wasn't expecting praise or reward, just a quiet sense that it had all added up to something solid. What I didn't realize was how much of life lives in the spaces between responsibility, the moments that don't feel important at the time, the conversations you postpone because you're tired, the invitations you decline because there will be others, the afternoons you trade away for productivity, assuming the people you love will still be there when things slow down. None of those choices feel dangerous when you're making them. They feel sensible, necessary. It's only later that you see the shape they formed. I miss things without ever intending to. Not in dramatic ways, just small absences that added up. School events I told myself weren't critical. Talks I delayed because tomorrow felt guaranteed. Time I assumed I could reclaim later. Later is a word that feels generous when you're young, and unforgiving when you're old. My wife died many years ago now. We were married long enough that our lives were woven together. We had routines, habits, shared jokes, small irritations that filled the days. When she was gone, people asked how I was holding up. I said I was managing, and that was true. I cooked, cleaned, paid bills, kept going. But managing something and understanding it are very different things. Grief doesn't always arrive as overwhelming sadness. Sometimes it arrives as disorientation, as the sudden realization that the person who shared your version of the past is no longer there to confirm it. There are memories I can recall from 50 years ago with perfect clarity, and others from last week that slip away. Memory becomes unpredictable at this age. That's unsettling, not only because forgetting is frustrating, but because memory is tied so closely to who you think you are. When memory falters, your sense of self feels less solid. You begin to understand how fragile identity really is. I used to believe that living long enough meant eventually understanding everything. That answers would appear naturally with time. In some ways, time does bring clarity. But it also reveals how many questions were never meant to have clean answers. You don't arrive at wisdom so much as you arrive at awareness. Awareness of what mattered more than you realized. Awareness of what you misunderstood. Awareness of how often you assumed you had more time than you did. There are things I would do differently if I could, but not because I failed. I didn't ruin my life. I didn't make reckless choices. What I did was assume that good intentions were enough. I assumed people would understand what I meant, even when I didn't say it clearly. I assumed relationships were sturdier than they sometimes are. Intentions don't age well if they're never acted on. They don't protect you from regret. They don't fill the space left by absence. At 92, you notice how much of life is shaped by what goes unsaid. Gratitude you felt, but never expressed. Apologies you delayed because they felt uncomfortable. Affection you assumed was obvious. These things don't haunt you loudly. They visit quietly, often when the house is still and there's nothing else to distract you. Old age isn't one long reflection. It's a series of ordinary days with brief moments of sharp awareness. I still find comfort in routine. Morning light through the window. A warm drink held carefully, sitting in the same chair. These small things matter more now because they anchor me to the present. They remind me that even a slow day still belongs to me. What surprised me most about getting this old is how invisible it can feel. People are polite, kind, even, but they don't linger. Conversations stay shallow. The world moves quickly past you, and you realize how much value we place on usefulness. When you're no longer producing or contributing in obvious ways, your presence feels lighter in the world. That takes adjustment. It isn't cruel, it's just how things are. I don't share this as a warning against aging. Growing old isn't a mistake. It's simply the continuation of living. But it isn't the version most of us imagine when we're younger. It doesn't arrive wrapped in wisdom and peace. It arrives unevenly, quietly, and often with lessons that come later than you'd like. If there's one thing I understand now, it's this. Don't wait for clarity before living honestly. Clarity comes late. Life happens early. Say what matters while it still fits the moment. Sit with people while you still can. Don't assume time will soften everything. Sometimes time simply removes the chance. At 92, I don't wish for more years. I wish for fewer unspoken moments. That kind of work belongs to earlier chapters of life. You can't go back and correct it at this stage. You can only see it clearly. This isn't what I thought old age would be, but it is what it is. And understanding that, without pretending otherwise, brings its own quiet form of peace. That's why I shared this story. Not because my life was extraordinary, but because it was ordinary. And ordinary truths are often the ones we avoid listening to until there's very little time left. If you're younger and hearing this, you don't need to change everything overnight. Just pay attention to what you assume will always be there. One day, without warning, it won't be.